Hello and welcome back to the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast. I have a very, very special guest today. He is one of my herbal teachers, and his name is Richard Mandelbaum. He's a registered clinical herbalist through the AHG, the American Herbalist Guild, and he's got a private practice offering personalized health consultations online and in person in the Southern Catskills, New York. Richard has been an avid student of our native flora for close to 40 years. And in addition to seeing clients, he teaches classes in clinical herbal medicine, field botany, and phytochemistry. He's a co-founder and core instructor at the Arbor Vitae School of Traditional Herbalism, my alma mater, and is the faculty at David Winston Center for Herbal Studies and the One Institute of Graduate Studies. He has been a registered herbalist since 2003 and was a member of the AHG board of directors from 2012 to 2018. He lives with his wife, Gabrielle, and his daughter, Rose, in their straw bale home in Forestburg, New York. And you can learn all about him in this episode, and I'll share some links at the end. So without further ado, Richard, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Marina. Good to see you as always, and happy to be here.
Yes, likewise. So the first question I like to ask my guests is really, what got you here? What got you on the path to being an herbalist and a teacher?
Yeah, and we have 3 days for that, right? Is that the
Not quite. People will not listen to this for 3 days, probably.
Okay, I'll stick to a day and a half. No, it's a big question is my point, and it's a good question, and it's always fascinating to me also, just to say before I answer it, to talk to people in herbal circles, holistic health circles, really anything, but holistic health circles in particular. What got you here? Because it's so varied and interesting always. So thank you for that. So yeah, I think for myself, what I ground myself in as having brought me to where I am now really are the plants themselves. Some people get to herbalism because they're in the health circle already and want to expand or look at it more fully or globally, holistically. Other people have their own personal health challenges, and that bring them on a journey. And for me, it really was the plants. You in the bio, the just a little introduction you did, you mentioned there's a line in there about having been like a student of native flora for close to 40 years, right? So that's also a marker for my life, because every few years I'm like, oh, I have to increase that number. But I'm in my mid 50s now, right? So that brings me back to teenage years, and that's really what we're talking about if we're talking about what brought me here. I first of all, I had some very traumatic things happen in my life. A lot of people have, but at that time in particular, I think I very much needed something to ground myself and to center myself, to recenter myself. And I think I just realized, thankfully, how disassociated I was, even though I wasn't verbalizing it at the time, from what I call the real world around us, the earth, the planet, the stars. I became interested in astronomy and learning constellations and birds and learning what the bird names were, and the trees in particular, first and foremost. And I just realized that I didn't know what any of the trees were. At the time, I was walking to high school, which it was not close to where I lived. I was just a weirdo and just an oddball 15-year-old or whatever, walking close to an hour to school because I chose to in the mornings. And I would pass all these beautiful things and interesting things. Just realized I don't know anything about this and wasn't raised with any of it. So I started teaching myself to identify trees first and then other plants, and then to make a long story slightly less long, over the years that followed that, I got interested in foraging, because if you know what the plants are and then you read somewhere like, oh, you can eat that, and it's like, okay, let me check that out. I know how to identify that and where to find it, and coming at it from the lens of botany first and foremost, which is still a passion of mine to this day. And then from there, interested in organic gardening and learning to grow plants. And from there, it's not too long a leap to medicinal uses of plants, and meeting a real live herbalist for the first time in my 20s, and entering those circles and realizing how deep it is and how rich it is, which I had been completely clueless about, and then deciding to study. So I studied formally with David Winston. That goes back more than 25 years now. I have to keep increasing that number too. But a little bit more than that, and other wonderful teachers, Rosemary Gladstar, William Lassassier in New York City, and then just going from there.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that fascinating piece of your personal history. I don't think I've quite heard all those pieces together. So that's really special. And I agree, it's so interesting to hear people's stories and how they got here. And I think it speaks to like a huge missing piece that we need to ground ourselves in this 3D physical reality. And what better way than things that grow from the ground and also change with seasons and cycles and show us those transitions, and also a way to respect where we are and who we share the space with by knowing their names and getting familiar with these other beings. And then maybe even utilizing them for our own healing journey, whether that's physical or spiritual or what have you. But yeah, I think when you don't grow up with that as a culture and as a family value, it's really fascinating that some people still find their way here. So I think it's quite amazing that you found your way through those pieces and now you're able to teach others.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I'm so thankful for it because it is my medicine, and it is it is the way I frame herbal medicine in my mind. It is so much more than just what can I take for my rheumatoid arthritis or for my whatever, fill in the blank, Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism. Like all those things are really important. And I work with people clinically every day and teach about that too. But medicine is a powerful word, right? Medicine is a much broader word than just what pill you're taking. And it's really about what heals us. And I am thankful because that is my medicine. And I am biased completely, but I will say I think it's everybody's medicine. I think we can't escape what we are biologically, and we've been co-evolving in this biome for billions of years, and we might be disassociated from it, but we're never apart from it, whether we're conscious of it or not. So thankfully, that's something that that some of us can tap back into, and like you're referring to, if we're brought up without it, it's good to reflect on how unnatural that is, how rare that is, how recent, and how much of an anomaly that is. That's not normal for the hundreds of thousands of years that we've been in like a primate form and much longer on the planet. Like that's all very new, that we might be that distance from the world around us and not know, the other organisms we share the planet and our ecosystem with.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I took away from being in the herbal community and going through Arbor Vitae's curriculum, essentially. And just to quote Nicholas Culpeper, he's the one that said herbalism is people's medicine. I'm sure there's many other before him who said that too. And of course, after him. And I think it's so true. And it really does reflect that we take it for granted that we're among these other living beings and organisms, and they were here before us. as you always reminded us as well. And so there's this intelligence in the universe and the universal laws and physics and all the things that create the universe, whether you want to say it's a physical force or God or universe or whatever people, ascribe that to. But there's these rules and laws that the universe does follow. And so when we look at what we've created as a culture, especially like the Western civilization, and what we consider a commodity or a value, and what we aspire to be and measure our success, is really counter-natural, right? It's not natural at all. And I find myself always thinking, or often at least, wow, this is like a perversion of the natural world and the natural laws of the universe, the way that we expect ourselves to live up to certain standards. And quite frankly, that is what is making a lot of us sick, because we're not designed to live in this way. And, we don't have to go far or that far back, like you said, to see other countries, second world, third world, that are closer to nature, that actually have completely different values and systems, and also different problems from us. But it's like, which problems are we trading for?
Absolutely. And I personally, in some ways, this kind of conversation can sometimes easily become pessimistic or feel cynical. And I actually firmly believe we are smart enough to figure that out. Like, we don't, I was talking to some of my students the other day in class, and I was sharing that, I don't want to go wholesale back 300 years or 500 years. I mean, go into an older cemetery and walk around, and you see a lot of babies died, a lot of little kids in their first few years of life. A lot of women died during childbirth. Like, we don't have to make it this simplistic binary between, do you want to go back to the old days or do you want to live with modern comforts? I really do think we're smart enough to find the balance, or move towards it at least. And I think what gets in the way more is greed, and without hopefully becoming too political about it, capitalism doesn't help. Putting everything under the structure of for-profit gain is so distortional. And there are other ways we can do things to benefit from what the really miraculous things we can do with technology and modernity. That's how we're talking to each other right now. But without wholesale just giving up what we need as people, and to live full, healthy lives that honor our place on the planet, right? We're not there, but I think we could be if we wanted to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a lot of what causes debate and heated controversies. It's like, okay, are you on this side? Are you on this side? Are you the future progressive side and the scientific side? Or are you like this woo-woo herbalist hippie who is trying to go back and set us back ages? And so I think it's important to realize that, we take a lot of our modern life for granted, and we probably can't imagine what it is to live without running water and electricity. And we live essentially better than kings would live back when there were a lot of kings, right? So it's interesting that the human, whether it's like a drive or soul or this desire, like no matter how good we have it, we always like want to reach for that next level. And so I think the next level is a combination of using the resources we have, the natural world and the technology, in a symbiotic sort of way. And one of the classes that we recently recorded together, Richard, was on the Gaia theory. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that, and how we can start to think globally and personally about being the best of both worlds.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Marina. And that's an interesting and a good example, I think, to illustrate the point we're both making. And of course, you have this strong scientific expertise in your background, and I very much admire and honor science as a tool, right? It's a tool. So like all tools, like what are we doing with it? Are we using it wisely? What are our motives behind using it? But it's a wonderful tool when used the right ways. And Gaia theory is an interesting example, I think, of how science and the scientific process and the critical thinking that is behind science can actually lead us full circle back to indigenous and traditional wisdom that people have held a long time. I very firmly believe there is no distinction whatsoever between a traditional approach to how we view the world, certainly how we approach herbal or medicine and health more specifically, but in a general way too. There's no distinction between a traditional an indigenous approach or framework and a science-based one. I think that's like you were saying earlier, a binary. It's a false dualism, really, like what is often discussed in Buddhism, right? It's a false dualism, that either or a framework. And so with Gaia, the idea, for folks who are not familiar, named for I believe Titan, not goddess. I don't want to get my Greek mythology wrong, but for the earth, for Mother Earth, and the scientific theory was first developed and published by James Lovelock, who was a climatologist, and Lynn Margulies were the two that most moved that forward. Both really fascinating people for a whole bunch of reasons that I could go on about, but Lynn Margulies in particular is one of my science heroes. But the idea, basically, the basic hypothesis behind it is that if you look at the way the Earth operates on a planetary scale as a biome, there are regulatory processes in place similar to the negative feedback loop processes inherent in our endocrine system function, for instance, that make it clear that the Earth as a whole is operating and maintaining its own internal ecosystem as a single organism. And this is not a new idea. This is an ancient idea, to the point I was making earlier, but science can lead us there as well, and also help us kind of get back to it. And this is, in some circles, Gaia, the evidence for and published articles that support this idea, that kind of back it up, that illustrate how it's happening, or that kind of thing, are also under other frameworks of, like, linguistically, because not all researchers or journals want to write about or have their name associated with Gaia. For instance, it's a little too hippie to use the word you used earlier, but there's actually quite a lot, sometimes published as geophysiology, for instance, because it sounds fancier. But there are a lot of ways in which this happens, and that's the basic idea of it. So it's kind of like this fractal layering, like we know now through microbiome research, through genomic research, showing that the human genome actually, over millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years, our genome has actually evolved by incorporating genetic material from other organisms. There's one estimate that 8% of our DNA is viral in origin, for instance, and our mitochondria are descended from bacterial species that lived separately at one point, along with some of the other organelles inside of our cells. And then, of course, we have the full microbiome of, thousands of other species of bacteria, and there's some fungi in there. And then there's 10 times that amount is the estimate of viral species that live on us and in us. So we know that we are walking ecosystems. Thinking about us as an individual organism when we look at ourselves is false, really, right? We're a biome. And if we expand that down into the microscopic level, we can also expand that outward and upward into the macroscopic level and look at how this is really like a fractal layering of ecosystems at work.
Yeah, thank you for that foundation. I actually just quickly looked it up. And so Gaia is the primordial earth goddess that gave birth to Titans. So just to clarify any Greek mythology questions that may arise from here.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So
yeah.
Even before, predating. Good. Makes sense.
But I love the picture you just painted with like the organism being a mirror for like the inside and the outside, right? So within, so without, sort of the environment that hosts the organisms, or which one is the host, right? So kind of playing around with that terminology, I'm wondering how you apply that in your herbal practice and looking at people's health. How does this Gaia theory allow us to see things differently and more holistically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an interesting question. And of course, with the vast majority of people I'm sitting with, I'm not discussing Gaia theory. Now, once in a while I do, because it goes there with certain people, especially people who have been seeing me longer, and it comes up in conversation. But a lot of people, as you know, seeking out herbal medicine or holistic medicine are not necessarily rethinking their cosmology. They may just like nobody's helped them, and they need help, and they're suffering, and so that's the important thing to always focus on. So a few different things come to mind to answer your question. One is that I certainly do believe, and there is, to speak of science, increasing very interesting body of evidence for the power of immersing ourselves in natural settings, and the interesting ways in Japan this is referred to as forest bathing, of course, which is now kind of crossed over, but that is originally of Japanese origin, and that's where most of the science comes from. And some of the therapeutic benefits that arise from that, some of which are obvious, we might guess at, like our blood pressure can go down and our stress hormones self-regulate better. But some things that are not so obvious, like immune system modulation, right? And all of the monoterpenes that the plants and trees are emitting, that we are ingesting, that we've co-evolved with, that have interesting therapeutic effects. Pain relief is one of the things that the forest bathing research has shown. I had a client at one point who, and this is just it's such a clear example to share, reported to me that her arthritis basically would disappear when she would visit the Botanic Garden. This was in Brooklyn when I was still practicing in Brooklyn. So first of all, if I don't spend enough time talking to somebody, if I'm just like, okay, what tinctures or what teas am I recommending? Let's spend 20 minutes or let's spend 8 minutes or whatever it is. I'm going to miss a lot that's crucial. And that could be easily missed. That's profound, right? And I hear things like that on a more tempered level pretty regularly. So what do I do with that as an herbalist? Well, that is, in my opinion, herbal medicine, to surround yourself with the plants and relieve yourself of your arthritic symptoms. So this was someone who is financially challenged. And I made sure that a part of her budget was going towards a membership at the Botanic Garden, and bus fare, subway fare, etc. and not to any, too many fancy supplements that I might be recommending, although those are important too. And we did all of that as well. This was rheumatoid arthritis, so immune modulation for the autoimmune part of it, and anti-inflammatory diet, and herbs and supplements to reduce inflammation, all the above, right? But that's profound and could be easily missed. And I'll tell you, 90%, if not more of the time I bring this up with people in my practice, it resonates immediately. People are like, oh my God, you're right. And so part of our job is to just ground the person we're working with in how important this is and how much a part of the medicine this is, not just the herbs that we're taking in another form or supplements. That said, I do think there's something more subtle too. Like if this is my framework, philosophically, ideologically, whatever we want to call it, that I'm coming at all of this to, that I have in my mind, that I'm not even sharing verbally, because that's not what someone's here for. That's fine. I think it does work its way through, and I do think even an entry point, I've certainly seen this happen, where an entry point into rethinking things begins with one's own health journey, and with seeing like, oh my gosh, this is giving me relief in a way that other stuff didn't. I want to learn more what's behind all this. Like, what is this about? And oh my gosh, that's a plant that grows around me. I'm really curious about that. And or I could put that in my garden next to my tomatoes, or whatever direction it goes in for somebody, even if it doesn't go in those direct directions. I think there is a broadening and an opening of mind that happens with all of us, myself included, the more we work with this, even if it's subtle and behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. I think foundation is where it all begins. And so if we start with the cosmology, with the philosophy, with the whole ethos that this is our belief system, right? That we are part of something greater than ourselves, and that we are this conglomeration of different living organisms that are forming this living, breathing organism, and we're part of a larger ecosystem. It allows us to approach medicine and healing in a much different way than just like identifying the pathology, like treating it with some very specific things, and then being done with the symptoms, And I think it allows us to be a little bit more mindful and aware, and also distancing, and not having it be just like so singularly focused on the problem, and instead allows us that greater framework that we're part of something. Our pain doesn't have to be so internalized. We can find different ways to express ourselves so that we're not suffering, or not suffering as much, and that there's not just like this one solution, and if it fails, we have no other options. I think it allows us to just have this greater agency over understanding, wow, there's so much available, and I can look at it from so many different angles, and I get to be a little bit more free and joyful and playful with the options that are in front of me, rather than like this fear of the symptom that's occurring.
Absolutely. I agree so much with all of that. So like the power of how much taking a walk every day can be therapeutically, right? And to engage in that positive way. Absolutely. And viewing medicine in that positive, empowering way, right? I think about how much the way medicine is practiced, and I don't even necessarily mean just conventional medicine. I think a lot of alternative medicine can follow this model too, can be very disempowering. It's about the expert in the proverbial or literal white coat, kind of handing down their expertise from on high about what's going to heal you. And there's some of that. Of course, somebody's coming to me, they're coming because they hope I know something that they don't yet, and that I'm going to share that. But it's about entering a relationship rather than a power dynamic. And I think a lot of it is, to your point, very disempowering. Even as someone's taking remedies or taking medicines, it's all kind of passive versus active, right? And my goal when I work with people is that they don't need me anymore. And I tell people that, like, that's like, I hope you keep in touch and tell me how you're doing. But that's my goal, that you now know what you need and what to do. And if that's not the case, give me a call. But that's the goal, that there's some capacity building and empowerment built into that relationship and that process. And that goes right back to what you said earlier when you quoted Nicholas Culpeper, right? If this is people's medicine, it's not about anyone holding it on their side of the aisle. And you always have to go to the expert to learn what to do. Now, you do, if something's complicated and difficult, need to go seek out help, but hopefully that will be a process of learning more how to address your own health over time. And that's a step along the way towards that.
Yeah. And something we also spoke about a lot when it comes to the immune system, which we were mentioning today, and the ecosystem, which we're also mentioning, is the hygiene hypothesis, and how, this obsession with the germ versus terrain, and killing the germ, killing the problem, whatever it is, killing the cancer, and then making the environment like sterile, essentially, a lot of the time. And how we just have seen with COVID, like with the masking and with the sterilization of everything, that can lead to some erosion and disruption of the natural biome and the ecosystems that are there to have the symbiosis and the synergy and the balancing of each other. So when you create a disbalance, you actually create the opportunistic rise of different pathogens. And you also have antimicrobial resistance, and you also have sensitivities and allergies and autoimmune issues that we see, and inflammation that's chronic and uncontrolled. So I think like the whole approach that we have been having with the advances in medicine, we're now seeing that there's some imperfections, right, that are not completely thought out. And so the Gaia hypothesis, to me, and herbalism in general, has helped me to understand that we should be focusing on the systems, on the ecosystem specifically, and how we can balance and work together with these other living organisms that are part of us and our environment and our life. And that balance is health, not just us being healthy. We're actually only as healthy as the ecosystem that we create.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Well said. And I think what's under the surface or between the lines here is biodiversity. And when we look at ecosystems that are resilient and healthy and can mitigate or minimize impact from things that are pathogenic or harmful and rebound from that, because those things will happen, right? They're part of being here and part of being alive, both for individual organisms and for ecosystems. Things happen, but we hopefully rebound from that. Biodiversity is that underlying thread that connects all these dots, and we know that in terms of our own microbiome now. And you one thing I like to point out to people when having these discussions is look at the very best probiotic supplements. Maybe they'll have a dozen different strains in them, maybe even 24. That's unusual, but we'll get. But really, a healthy gut microbiome for a human being is actually tens of thousands of different species. So to me, it's akin to cutting down a rainforest and then planting just 5 or 6 species of trees. Like no. That's sure. Sometimes take the supplements. This is not an anti-probiotic supplement statement I'm making right now, but I'm pointing out how limited that approach can be. And that's just an example of what you're pointing to, because we know that when biodiversity crashes in ecosystems, when we disrupt the natural self-regulation of an ecosystem, we get emergent infectious diseases. We could talk about the history of HIV. You mentioned COVID. We talk about Lyme and the ecological disruption that's behind how much it's spreading, climate change, as well as habitat loss. We know that when we have a negative impact on biodiversity, which we're doing in a greater way than has happened for a long, long time, from all the records, pollen records, fossil records, et cetera, we have of Earth's history, that disease emerges from that crash in biodiversity, both on the individual and ecosystem level. And I think that's very much what you're pointing out by bringing up the hygiene hypothesis, right? We can, yes, something like an antibiotic can save lives, but when we selfishly, greedily start using it in agriculture to fatten up animals in confined factory farm settings, which, never mind the ethical side of that, in which the animals are suffering, I think for that reason alone they shouldn't exist. But that's a huge driver, for instance, of antibiotic resistance. Or I remember, this is anecdotal from my own life, but my daughter having a bad earache, so common, right? Every parent goes through this, and seeing a doctor just to have it checked out, and we're talking to her, and she's like, well, here's a antibiotic prescription. And I said to her, thanks for the prescription, but I think we're gonna do some other things and see if she really needs it. And the doctor paused, and she said, that's reasonable. In parts of the world, maybe you would have even gotten a prescription yet. And I was like, well, it wasn't her fault, but this whole system that drives her to just prescribe it anyway, right? And so all of this obliteration of life when it's not necessary, herbicide use and pesticide use. We could go on, the two of us, but I completely agree with what you're saying. And for me, I have definitely learned from reading first and foremost, and then reflecting on that, but reading particularly the ecological literature, where there's so much evidence of how harmful a loss of biodiversity is. And it's clear that when we look at ourselves as individuals, and we look at the ecosystems we have created for ourselves to live in, there's a deficiency there, which again, I think we could solve. Like, I don't think it's beyond solving at all, actually.
Yeah, I'm optimistic too. And like you said, it starts with education, information, and knowing that we need specific keystone species and commensals to regulate those opportunistic or pathogenic strains can be a good first step. And the probiotics that you mentioned, and there's a lot of different things. And I think I need like at least 2 or 3 more episodes with you to talk about the things that you brought up with infectious diseases and why they're on the rise for those specific things. And then also your approaches, which you're an expert on TCM, among other things. So I'm not going to go there right now, but what I did want to share about is this idea that we are all herbalists, right? So like you said, it took you on this journey to discover, this whole biodiversity ecosystem and living beings around you, which you're now using therapeutically for people. And those people, right, whether they're taking a walk in the forest and inhaling some essential oils and the monoterpenes that are in the air from this majestic tree that's around the conifer, let's say, or they are drinking a fermented drink or eating a fermented food or drinking coffee, right? Let's start with tea and coffee. I mean, who doesn't drink that? If you're eating some sort of plant or drinking some sort of plant, you may be an herbalist, right? Just you don't know it yet.
I agree so much. There's no threshold. Now, of course, Of course, if you're dealing with a medical situation that's tricky or challenging, or you're on multiple medications, or you've received a diagnosis and that's got more serious implications, of course, like as in everything, we want to seek out guidance and help, right? I seek out an accountant for my taxes and an attorney when I need help in that. So you want to seek out somebody who's on that path more and has more experience, especially for complicated situations. But what is just wonderful about herbalism is there's no threshold. There's no point at which you have to wait and not even start until you receive the proper training. You start with the gentle stuff, the safe stuff. And like you're saying, we're all doing it anyway. If you have a cup of chamomile tea, or in a lot of the world, linden tea or chrysanthemum flower tea, mint after dinner, having a cup of mint tea, that is herbal medicine. You can just slowly, gradually learn and not jump to the rare stuff right away, and go from there. And it's all of us all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning local things, and quite a lot of the times that's all that we need. We need to have the knowledge, whether we go to school or go to an expert for our own helping with our own care. And then having the access is usually pretty easy, and really it belongs in the home, right? Like it used to be common knowledge, and now in some parts of the world, unfortunately, it's lost, but we can bring it back. And I just want to speak for a few moments in encouraging others and how they can take those first steps, and what can they control on their healing journey, or in a way that they can reconnect with nature and herbs or the land in some other ways. Like, what are your best tips for that?
Oh, yeah. First of all, just start paying attention, slowing down. We all need this, right? We're all connected and interconnected by corporate controlled media all the time. We can get on our phone anytime. We can tap into that, but like slow it down. That's for me, the meditative therapy of botany, for instance, is that you have to just slow down. And so anything we can do to slow it down and pause and just start looking. So you don't, your thing might not be to learn what species is that, what species is this, but whether it's the tree that's growing as a sidewalk tree outside your apartment building, or it's the park you have nearby, or the forest nearby, any setting, I find it, whether people live in an urban or suburban or rural setting, we all need to remind ourselves of this all the time. It's just pause, slow it down, watch the animals, pay attention to the plants, get up close to things, get up close to those flowers, really look at them. And then, sure, you can begin to learn that one thing that's wonderful about herbalism right now is there's a lot of it going on. And there's a lot you can tap into in person, at least in part. I highly encourage, if you can, see who else is in your area. I bet there's going to be a community. Don't do it all online. There's so many good online resources, but try to find people to spend time with, wildflower groups or botany groups or mushroom groups or things like that. You can take classes. There's a lot of that, or good books, all those kind of resources that people know about that are available. But just start doing it is the main thing, and see where it leads you. And you don't have to have a predetermined destination in mind. I certainly didn't. No, I didn't end up here because I had a plan. So just let that go and begin to explore all of it.
Love that. Yeah, start with the first step. So Richard, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And then, like I said, we can probably have like 10 more, but let's wrap up if you have just one more minute with a couple of rapid fire round questions.
Sure.
Okay, beautiful. So first question is, what's the number one advice you have for somebody to improve their quality of life right now?
Yeah, you said they're rapid fire questions. Do the answers have to be rapid? That's a joke. To improve quality of life, slow down. Find moments to pause, find moments to slow down and be present. I know it's around us all the time, so that we hear this, but really be right where you are and right when you are, focused on the moment you are in and what is around you. That is an incredible therapy, incredible medicine.
Yeah, beautiful. What's one piece of advice or guidance you would give a younger version of yourself?
To stop trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Love it. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And finally, a fun question. What's your favorite pastime, hobby, or a fun, surprising fact about yourself?
Oh boy, and that's a funny one, because what's funny about me is like, what do I like to do in my spare time? I like to go out and look at the plants, right? So it's like but I also love the stars. I have a telescope and love to check out Jupiter. Recently has been beautiful. I write poetry, and I've begun to dabble in strange science fiction short stories. So there's something, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that either. That's cool. Love to read sometime.
Sure. Yeah.
All
Happy.
right. Beautiful. Well, Richard, I'd love for you to tell folks how they can reach out, learn more about your work, and support you.
Thank you so much for that, Maria. So the best way is to go to my website. So it's just my name, richardmandelbaum.com. I'm not on social media. That's not because I'm opposed to social media, but I just need to very carefully monitor how much screen time I have, and I already have more than I want. So I'm not there. But if you go to my website, you can sign up for my newsletter, and I send stuff out here and there about things I'm up to or things I want to share with folks. And if you're in my area, like you said in the beginning, I teach at several different schools, but I sometimes offer things that are more open to the public. And particularly if you live anywhere near me, especially during the summer, I offer botany and herbal outings and things like that, but occasionally things online as well.
Yeah, those are really fun. I highly recommend if you're in the New York area. So Richard, thanks again for being on. Maybe I'll have you back on talking about TCM, Lyme, other things. And I hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marina. Take care.